We often watch football games that at the end of each field, we have these structures that become quite popular, especially at the end of games because they usually mean points. Well, Timothy B. Brown of footballarchaeology.com joins us today to tell us about the history of the goalposts. Tim, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Hey there. Good to chat and looking forward to kind of tearing things down as we talk about a post.
Tearing things down as you talk about a post. Oh boy, I haven't seen one of those games in a while where the crowd tears them down, but those used to be quite
Yeah.
popular in the like
Yeah.
70s and 80s, weren't they?
Yeah. And even before that, there's a lot of, I mean, we think people tore things down, but man, in like the 20s and 30s, it was like every game people would do that.
Yeah, I can't even imagine how much those things must cost nowadays at these stadiums, and probably an expensive endeavor if somebody rips them down today.
Yeah.
So, but okay, recently wrote an article, and that's why we're talking about this, called "A History of the Goalpost." And what can you tell us about the history of these fine pieces of art, I would call them, at the end of each
Ah,
field?
well, yeah. So it's actually like 2 weeks ago, I think it was, we were talking about goalposts. And I said, when they originally made them, um, like really the first few years, they just erect two posts and then put a string between the posts like 10 feet off the ground, right? And that was kind of the case like earlier on, you know, back in England, when they were playing both soccer and rugby, if you kick the ball under that rope or crossbar for soccer and you kicked it over for rugby, right? And so that was kind of the original thing going
And then
on.
maybe play a game of badminton afterwards, right?
Or croquet.
Or
Okay.
croquet.
Um, but like, when goalposts began, they were all what I'll just call the H style, right? Kind of the traditional two posts and a crossbar. And they were planted on the goal line, which is why it's called the goal line, right? And so so that went on, for a long, long time. And a lot of them were just, especially the like small towns. I mean, I did a post one time about them, just images of just really cheesy, beat up, like crooked goalposts. I mean, it was just the best that they could do with scrap lumber, right? Um, but so, anyways, so the goalposts were on the goal line from the beginning, but they got in the way, and so there's stories of, the way I told this particular tidbit, I was focused on Harvard Yale because like in 1899, there was a Harvard player was trying to score. They had the ball on the two or something like that, and ends up running at the goalposts. And the Yale defenders kind of brace themselves against the posts and are able to stop the Harvard runner, and then they end up either losing or tying. And then similar thing happened a few years later, except the Harvard runner absolutely they ran into the goalpost and fell back. So it wasn't even a defender that stopped him. But but so the point is that they got in the way. And this is before the forward pass. So, but they got in the way and they were an obstacle. And so after that 1899 event, there was a Harvard guy, um, Edward Manley, who invented what was called the safety goalpost. And if you look at old pictures, you'll see these things popping up from time to time. And he patented, he has a patent on them. But it was basically you had the two posts like normal, but they were planted like 3 to 4, even 5 yards behind the goal line. And then, so you'd have you'd have a post, and then you'd have like an extension and bracing that would hold up the uprights that were actually over the goal line, right? So the posts were several yards off the line, but the uprights and the crossbar were over the goal line. And in his patent, he shows a single post design, but I think they were making them out of wood, and they just couldn't figure out how to support all that weight on that one post. So, anyways, I've never seen an image of one of those early ones. But so everybody used either the H design or the safety goalpost design. And I think part of the reason why the safety goalpost didn't turn out to be that popular is that he charged $50 for every installation. And so he probably didn't collect on all of them, but that would have kept $50 is, some pretty good money back then.
Yeah.
Um, so and then so just another little thing on the evolution of goalposts. I found there's a lot of like a lot of things. Amos Alonzo Stagg is credited with being the guy who padded the first goalpost, but he didn't. There was um, I found examples from like 1896 of places that padded their goalposts, and then like I've read things like Stagg saying Stagg invented them, but they were out there, and I've got images, and I think I've got them in the tidbit, images of padded goalposts, and yet in 1905 Chicago's field still didn't have padded goalposts. So, he clearly
He
wasn't the
invented them, he didn't use them, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. It's like, sorry, I don't believe that. 1906, he wrapped a mattress around the post. So, anyways, um, so then you get into the whole okay, goal line versus end line, and so I was always on the goal line, and then in college they were the they moved the goalpost to the end line in 27. And the rationale was kind of somewhat safety oriented, but it was also, back then you didn't have hash marks. And so, you could have the ball way over near the sideline, right? I mean, that's where you could be on fourth down when you're trying to kick a field goal. So part of the rationale for moving it to the end line was to give people better angles to kick. Now it would be 10 yards further, so presumably you couldn't you'd have to be closer to for the same kind of distance. Um, so anyways, and then like the NFL basically did the same thing. They used college rules, but then like in 1932, 31 or 32, they uh, they had like 20% of their games ended in ties.
Mm.
So they said, okay, we got to stop all these ties. So they moved the goalpost to the goal line to try to, encourage scoring. And I'm not sure it did a whole lot, but because both teams still had more or less equal chances.
Uh,
Um,
well, they had a championship game was it Sammy Baugh? They scored a safety because he threw a pass and it hit the goalpost, and they counted as a safety. And Washington lost by two or something, if I remember correctly. It
yeah,
affected the game with that safety by his pass.
yeah, there were
So it did
some,
it did increase scoring that way too, I guess.
yeah, I guess so. I mean, there were some strange rules about, can you, because I did a story on doinks, fairly recently. And so some of them, sometimes the doink was automatically, the play ended. Other times it was still a live ball. So, who knows? Um, but then the NFL, they moved it to the end line in 74. And that's largely because, in the 60s is really when soccer style kicking took over. I mean, they'd had soccer style before that, but that's when it really became, popular. And they were just booting the ball from so far out that they said, okay, we got to move this thing. We got to move these things back and make it harder again. Um, but then the other piece of that is like in 66, there's a guy named Jim Trimble who he had been, I think, the Eagles head coach. Pretty sure he's Eagles head coach
Could be.
before that, but he was the Montreal Alouettes coach, and then he got fired, and so he's chatting with a buddy at breakfast one time and talking about a game where like the defense had on the Canadian field, they had the defender had braced himself against the goalpost, and supposedly one of them was toying around with their fork, and they looked at it and kind of said, you could redesign the goalpost to have a single post and then kind of gooseneck over, So they came up with essentially the same design as the safety goalpost from 1900, but it was all new and it was aluminum, and so they were able to convince the NFL to adopt their goalpost in 1967. So, and then they had increased to like 20 feet high. Now I think they're 30 feet high on the uprights. Um, By the NCAA, you can use either, the H style or the, slingshot gooseneck, style of or Telegol, which was their brand name. So that's kind of that's the story of goalposts. And I didn't get into the width of them. That changed from time to time, but
Yeah, it's interesting, like at the high school level and below, I don't I think schools can still make them. I know like some of them, I've been at schools like where you can tell like their shop made them or shop class made them. You get these crazy looking
yeah,
engineered designs and everything. And somewhere I have a collection of them. I was visiting my mother when she lived down in Dallas Fort Worth area, and I was driving by a middle school and I saw this goalpost. I'm like, going, oh my God, I never saw anything like that. I was taking pictures. So I had like a collection of these things. I gotta dig that up sometime. And there's really some really crazy looking ones I worked officiated games on, and ones I just had observed. But
yeah.
yeah, some interesting ideas come out of people's minds on the goalpost.
Well, the old shop class thing is interesting too because, um, when I can't remember if I published a tidbit about, or maybe it's still in the works. I don't know, but about like the yardage markers on fields. I
Hmm.
can't remember if I published that or not. Anyways, the little conical. There's been different designs, but all the things that yeah, actually I did. I published it last week. Anyways, so like in high schools, a lot of the signage and all that kind of stuff were shop classes made that stuff, right? And there were things where like shop kind of home ec and shop classes would make tackling dummies. I mean, they were just trying to save a buck, right? And so you have the girls sew these canvas tackling dummies, and then the boys would get sawdust and you know fill them up, and that's what you use for a tackling dummy. So anyway, shop classes have played a big role in
Yes,
high
they
school
did.
football. Right?
Yes, they did. So yeah, everybody at the school can get involved in a football game. That's for sure.
Yeah,
So
it's actually pretty cool.
yeah, it is. It is. And if you go back years later and you were in that shop class and you've been out of high school for decades, you can go back and tell your grandkids, "Hey, I helped make that, back in 1972." So we welded that. So yeah, some good stuff. Yeah, goalposts are always an interesting thing, and it's unique to football. And there's a lot of different devices and people and rules that are unique to football. And you dig into them and tell about the people and the events and the history, and evolution of some of these things, just like you did at the goalpost today, in your tidbits. And maybe you could share with folks where they can catch on to some of these tidbits.
Yeah, just go to footballarchaeology.com. It's a Substack, site, so you can subscribe, you can follow, or just bookmark it and show up in it whenever you want. But if you subscribe, you'll get an email every time that I publish something new. So then you don't have to search for it; it just arrives in your inbox. But
Um,
kind of whatever works for you.
That's the way to do it, make it nice and easy. And you even have the paid subscribe thing, so you get even more content, and that's the way to do it. You get all the goodies from Tim. So make sure you check
Yep.
that out and check out Tim each Tuesday here as he talks to us about some great antiquity of football. And Tim, we look forward to that again next week.
Very good. Look forward to it. Thanks, Terry.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.